There's a lot of people out there that think Miraidon EX is a bad deck, and well, I'm here to differ. This is my Miraidon EX deck, and in today's deck profile, I'm going to be sharing with you guys the deck that's won me tournament after tournament after tournament, and not just that, but this deck actually slays Charizard as well. We're covering each card in the deck and why it's included, the matchups, how to play it a little bit. Here's the exact 60 card list if you want to take a screenshot. I'll be sharing this with you at the very end of the video, and without further ado, let's switch over to the card cam. I hope you guys really enjoy this kind of content. I'm going to do more of these in-depth deck profiles and breakdown videos coming soon to the channel, so if you want to see more content like this, of course subscribe and let me know what decks you guys want to see on the channel. But without further ado, we're going to get really detailed into this, and this is all completely free on YouTube, so hit that like button down below to help pay my bills. With that said, let's get started. I do want to make a quick apology that it's taken this long to get this video out. This means you only have about 2 weeks to play this deck in real life before the North American International Championships, which is when rotation will hit, or not rotation, but the new format will be here with the new cards from Twilight Masquerade, and I will be upgrading this deck if you want to see how this deck will evolve over time. Of course, be on the lookout for more content from your boy. Every card in this deck was chosen for a very meticulous reason, and I've been playing it again for about the last 3 months, about the same 58 to 60 cards. This is not your typical Miraidon deck. I have never really been a huge fan of turbo style Miraidon with the peony build. I've always been playing a type of Miraidon that had a stronger mid to late game, less linear lines of play available. When I played Miraidon throughout the season, I was using cards like Path to the Peak. I'd be playing Double Flaffy. I wouldn't really have Peony in my deck at all. I've played Peony Miraidon twice in my life. Once went great and the other time was horrible, and I just was not a fan of how linear that deck was. You can really showcase your skill in that deck. This deck is much more versatile in the way that you can play it, and I'd like to call this deck essentially a control Miraidon, because we have a lot of control elements in this deck. One of the biggest L's that this deck used to take, or just at least Miraidon in general used to take, was Charizard EX, with Charizard being the most popular deck in the meta at about a 25% meta share. Miraidon players would just crumble because the game plan for Miraidon was hit hard, hit fast, take prizes, and Charizard is all about, you know, coming back from a prize difference, and they just destroy you. So this deck was teched out to beat Charizard, so now I can confidently say this deck has a 50-50 matchup into Charizard. Those games can go either way, and as I've probably mentioned in the earlier this video, or just in the past, I have beat several Charizards at multiple cups and challenges and tournaments. There was in fact even one tournament where I had to play against 2 Charizards back to back, and I beat both of those to win the challenge. So if you want to come at me with any disrespect or trolling in the comments, this is your warning now. I've been getting a lot of hate from people online recently, so if there's any sort of trolling or hate, I will just straight up block you, and I'll never see a message from you ever again. So to start things off, we have 3 copies of Miraidon EX. A lot of Miraidon decks would play 2, and I think that was just very, very greedy. You really want to use tandem unit turn 1, so Miraidon EX is also one of the attackers in this deck, which does come up from time to time, which is fantastic. The fact that you can hit 220 for 3 energies and have this amazing ability is broken. 220 HP is fantastic as well. Slap on a Bravery Charm, you have 270 HP, and there was actually one game I lost against a Shen PAL deck, and usually Shen PAL is a fantastic matchup. It's about a 70-30 for Miraidon. But in that matchup, I prized all 3 of my Miraidon EXs, and I wasn't playing Heavy Ball. So since that tournament, I put Heavy Ball in, and my life has been smooth sailing. There's also a lot of one-off attackers in this deck, and so having Hisui and Heavy Ball is very useful. And not just attackers, one-off cards like Squawkabilly, Zeraora. We have Regieleki V ×2. Now, Regieleki V and Miraidon, this is a deck that was played at the start of Scarlet and Violet era. There was a point where the VMAX would even go for like $30 Canadian because there was a lot of hype around this build, but it fell off and the prices have adjusted accordingly, of course. I love Regieleki V and VMAX in this deck because Regieleki V is basically a free retreater in training. You can set up your tandem units to set up Regieleki V, and then you're eventually going to get a free retreater out of your Regieleki VMAX, which is amazing. Typically, a lot of VMAX Pokemon, V-Star Pokemon, they have a thicker retreat cost, but because it's free retreat, all your Pokemon in this deck have basically only only one retreat cost or no retreat cost, which is really hard and annoying for your opponent to try and do any stall plays. In the past, we've had to worry about things, of course, like the Flaffy Boss stall that would always happen, and I would play cards like Ampharos EX to counter that, so they're actually gusting up my next future attacker without them even knowing it. But yeah, Regieleki V, we have 2 copies. It has 2 really good attacks too, which is great, and 2 stall matchups and other decks as well. Like if you're swinging into a Cramorant or a Comfey for 1 lightning and a DTE, your opponent's Cramorant is only going to hit you for 10 damage. So having a defensive attack like Lightning Wall is very strong, and then of course that does pivot into the Regieleki VMAX. So we'll get into the VMAX now. The VMAX is amazing, 310 HP. It is a absolute thick, tanky unit, kind of reminding me of how I had Ampharos EX at 330 HP or 340. Regieleki VMAX has the ability Transistor. This is an ability that allows your basic lightning Pokemon to do 30 more damage. So when you have things like a 1 attack switching bolt for 30, this is going to swing for 60. You have other attackers in this deck which will greatly benefit from the plus 30 damage increase. For example, if you have 2 Regieleki VMAXs on the board, your Miraidon EX can now swing for 280, perfect math into V-Star Pokemon, which is very, very handy. This is a 3 prize liability, so we're going to talk about that later, but the fact that it has free retreat and can attack for 1 lightning and 1 DTE is amazing. So we have 2 copies of the VMAX. Next up, we have Raikou V. Raikou V is amazing. He has been a staple in every Miraidon deck ever since its inception. Raikou V is the GOAT, although it's like a dog or cat Pokemon. I could say like a leopard or tiger. Raikou V has the ability, of course, fleet-footed. When it's in the active, you can draw 1 card. So very strong, especially if you're going to stack your deck with cards like Ciphermaniac's Codebreaking. Allowing you to draw into the exact card you want is very good. So for example, say you need to do 30 more damage and your opponent has limited their bench size very cautiously so you can't hit those numbers. Well, I've done plays like this where I've won, where I Ciphermaniac'd and either used Mew EX's ability or Raikou V's ability to draw into my Regieleki VMAX, and then I get to evolve, and now I'm doing 30 more damage, which is amazing and a play most players will not see coming. Raikou V is a great Pokemon if you're going to be aggressive earlier on in the game, either taking a knockout on a 1 prize or a 2 prize attacker. The attack Lightning Rondo does 20 damage and 20 more for each bench Pokemon, so it's going to scale with the amount of Pokemon on both sides of the field. This attack does cap out at 220 damage with all bench spots being filled. However, if you have Regieleki VMAX, you are going to be hitting either 250 or 280. So once again, we have another we have a basic Pokemon right here that can swing for 280 with the help of our Regieleki VMAX. It's such a cheap attacker. All you have to do is attach once, hit a generator, and you're cooking whatever Pokemon you want to swing into. So if your goal is to apply early pressure by taking a knockout, Raikou V is the way to go. Next up, we have Luxray V. Luxray V is the main tech card in this deck to combat against decks like Charizard, along with Control, and other decks do take L's to this just because Luxray V has a really strong attack called Fang Snipe. It costs 1 double turbo energy. We are running 2 double turbo energies in this deck, so using cards like Force Seal Stone to grab a DTE early game is pretty common. There's turns where I'll play Judge, attach Force Seal Stone, get DTE, and make your opponent's hand go down to 3 cards, and you're usually going to delete a really good supporter out of their hand, or a rare candy, or something good. That you're fighting against a control deck, you're probably going to want to hit their counter catchers or PAL pads, or a really good supporter. Say you're playing against a Lost Zone engine deck, you're going to want to go for those Chorus's Experiments, which is really, really big. Mirage Gate, Super Rod, all fantastic cards. And of course, if you hit their Ace Spec, hitting an Ace Spec is really good. Now, the downside to this attack is that it is 30 damage, which is very, very weak. However, with the help of, you guessed it, our boy Regieleki VMAX, we are now able to hit for 40 damage if we have a DTE on it, or 70 if we have a DTE on it. And of course, you can swing for 30, 60, or 90 if you just went the regular route of attaching lightning energies to Luxray V. Not only are we able to be a little disruptive and annoying and delete your opponent's trainers, but if you're swinging for knockout into Pokemon such as the smaller baby Pokemon, like Bidoof, or just any Pokemon that needs to evolve, or Comfey, taking knockouts plus discarding a card from their hand is just so busted, and I love watching my opponents squirm when it comes to me using Fang Snipe. A fun small play to look out for is if you are going to fight against Charizard. I always love going for the Sealstone for DTE attachment on Luxray V. If we do have the VMAX on the board, we're always going to chase down their Pidgey. Pidgey is target number 1. By having 1 VMAX on your field and Luxray V, you're swinging for 80 damage into their Pidgey. So you're KOing their Pidgey and also deleting a trainer from their hand. Another thing to note is the other attack is actually really good as well. Radiating Pulse costs 2 lightning, 1 colorless energy. It does 120 damage, and it says discard 2 energies from this Pokemon. Your opponent's Pokemon is now paralyzed. So the downside is you always have to discard 2 energies. You can't not paralyze them, and you can't not discard the energy. You have to. So if you did happen to put a DTE on your Luxray earlier, you can actually discard your double turbo energy. And so you're still going to hit 100 damage, but if you do have the Regieleki VMAX, you're going to swing for 130 plus paralysis. And then there's plays where you can just retreat back into your Regieleki V, which even has a potentially a lightning and a DTE on it for 200. You hit 330, perfect math, where I've paralyzed the Charizard and KO'd it with the Regieleki VMAX the next turn because they weren't able to retreat it or use Turo because they've lost their Pidgeot earlier on in the game, or I Fang Sniped their switching options. So DTE is amazing, that's why we're running 2. Next up we have Raichu V. Raichu V is our big one-shot attacker for this deck. You need to be able to blow up your opponent's Pokemon sometimes for 1 big attack, and sometimes that's all you need. You kind of want to just save this as a surprise attacker, a surprise threat later into the game, because Raichu V is usually a pretty big target for your opponent to knock out. 200 HP is pretty low for a basic Pokemon. Raichu V's attack is Dynamic Spark, 60 damage times the amount of lightning energies you discard from the board. And so when you have big bulky Pokemon like Regieleki VMAX, you're able to sort of hoard energies onto that Pokemon. We also are running tools in this deck like EXP Share, which allows Raichu V to just be instantly live. If your opponent attacks something else, knocked it out, you move that energy over to Raichu and just attach for turn. You're swinging pretty big. Generators can pop off really well. And then because we do have Regieleki VMAX, we're able to hit 330 HP, which is the magic number for those big EX Pokemon, by just having 1 VMAX on the board and 5 lightning energies. There's times where you might need to hit 430, maybe they have a Hero's Cape on their Charizard, or like maybe they have a Hero's Cape on another big Pokemon. I've done games where I swung for like 480 with Raichu and I knocked out a full health Charizard with Hero's Cape. So yeah, Raichu V, very good. Pretty much only want to use this for like big attacks. You don't want to be just keep discarding attacks with it throughout the, or energies with it throughout the game, because we don't really have recovery for energies in our discard pile other than a Super Rod, because Flaffy of course is gone. Next up we have Iron Hands EX. Iron Hands EX is a big public enemy for a lot of people. It is very good for obvious reasons like taking an extra prize card, and so this Pokemon is very good against single prize decks or Pokemon that need to set up with those smaller Pokemon. There's also times where you're able to use Ampu very much with bonus damage from Regieleki VMAX to swing for some stronger, larger Pokemon and hit those for knockout, potentially getting 3 prizes. And again, because we are running 2 copies of Double Turbo Energy in this deck, there's just a lot of times where you're able to hit a generator or 2 and then hit 2 energies for the half of the attack cost, and you'll just Heal Stone for a DTE, attach the DTE, and then start amping right away. There's games where you just amp 3 turns in a row and you win. Those are most common against like Lost Zone style decks or Gardevoir style decks, or just, you know, those small single prize Pokemon that can't handle the pressure that Iron Hands puts out. Of course, you don't always want to attack with Iron Hands turn 1. It is a little risky having a big bulky 4 retreat Pokemon on your bench. You kind of want to be careful putting this out right away, because it is usually a target for boss stall or counter catcher stall. So you really want to just play it when you plan to attack with it that same turn. Think of it as how Mirage or Lost Zone players will nest ball their Pokemon in Mirage Gate and then attack with it. Typically, a lot of Turbo decks would run 2, because a lot of the decks will basically rely on Ampu very much being the main thing. But Iron Hands is just a tech card. It's a one-off attacker. Again, this deck is super flexible. All these attackers are like one-off attackers, and so you have to really... This deck rewards practice and knowing how matchups go very well, because you have to pilot it accordingly. You can't just go full bunga, turbo, amp. You know, this deck is is very different compared to your regular turbo style of Miraidon that a lot of people are used to playing. Zeraora is fantastic as well, because it is a lightning attacker that you can, of course, use Miraidon to tandem unit. You get to have a guaranteed free retreater on your bench. It's also a Pokemon that can swing for 30 damage, for 1 lightning, or it does 60 if it's swinging into an evolution Pokemon. So hitting that 60 number is very handy if you're fighting against decks like Arceus, because you can swing for Miraidon 220 and then swing for the extra 60 on Arc V-Star to knock it out, leaving them with a 1 prizer in the active, and usually your opponent does not want to attack a 1 prizer. The attack cost is also super cheap, so it's really easy to just clean up your opponent's Pokemon with Zeraora just by using tandem units, attach an energy, and you can swing into Pokemon like Roaring Moon EX that use Frenzy Gouging the turn before. You can also just straight up boss KO a Pidgey. If you have a Regieleki VMAX on the board, you can swing for 60 or 90 into opponent's Pokemon. There's also cases where if you have the damage boost from Regieleki VMAX at 1 or 2 times effect, then you can use Zeraora to swing into opponent's Pokemon like Lumineon V, Squawkabilly EX, or Pidgeot EX as well. Zeraora is really good, heavily underrated, and it's also 1 card off of Regieleki V and VMAX in the Silver Tempest database. Like, I kid you not, these cards are all together. This is 56 in Silver Tempest, this is 57, this is 58. It's like these were all meant to be together forever. Next up, we have Mew EX. Mew EX is amazing. It's our kind of like a little draw engine we have in our deck since we aren't playing Barrel. We can only grab this card, of course, with like things like Nest Ball and Ultra Ball, which isn't too hard. Restart is a fantastic ability and can allow you to draw into cards when you do play Ciphermaniac's Codebreaking that you want to see with Mew. Mew can just help you out late game too when you get hit with a Roxanne or a Judge. It has the attack Genome Hacking, which is fantastic, being able to clone your opponent's attack. The most commonly used attack that we steal for Mew EX is Mimikyu's Ghost Eye, because we're placing damage counters on your opponent's Mimikyu. The Mimikyu ability does not work, and so Mew EX can knock out Mimikyu very easily. You can use it to copy many other attacks. I think the most common attack we've used for Mew EX is Moonlight Shuriken. By having 1 lightning and a DTE, you're able to copy Moonlight Shuriken, and then you just discard the DTE, and you swing for 70 on 2 of your opponent's Pokemon. And of course, Mew does have free retreat, and having a free retreat in this deck is very strong. One thing to keep in mind though is this card is definitely one of the major liabilities in the deck. 180 HP is a little low. Mew EX is a card you have to be careful along with Squawkabilly. These cards you do not want to play turn 1 at all, or just you don't play these cards when you're going into the Charizard matchup, because all they need to do is use Boss or Prime Catcher and they gust up your Pokemon, and then they can just start initiating the prize trade. These 2 cards do not come out with Charizard until you start taking prizes. The last Pokemon in our deck is Squawkabilly EX. Squawkabilly EX is not necessary at all times. There's some times where you just don't want to be discarding your hand, and so you don't have to play Squawkabilly, but then there's sometimes too where you're able to just apply and overwhelm your opponent with so much pressure going second or even going first sometimes, where you don't mind discarding your hand. Squawk and Seize is just super strong. We do have Super Rod in this deck for recovery, so if we do end up losing one of our one-off attackers or a VMAX or something important, we can always Super Rod it back into the deck. So now let's get to the 2 stadiums and talk about our 2 liabilities. So Regieleki VMAX, 3 prize liability, Squawkabilly EX, 2 prize liability, and there's times where you have a damaged Pokemon and you know your opponent's going to want to knock it out. The 2 stadiums we have in our deck are Collapsed Stadium and Beach Court. So we're taking notes from other big decks in the game like Charizard, how a lot of decks would just use Collapse and get rid of their Rotom, get rid of their Fish, get rid of their liabilities. We're doing the same with Regieleki and Squawk. At times we have to Collapse and get these cards off the board. Beach Court is fantastic. I love being able to have free retreat. It's very useful when you are doing attacks with like Miraidon and you need to reset the attack with the switch. Just being able to switch out your Pokemon is super good. Beach Court is also in this deck as well to counter Future Box. Because of the Pokemon card Heavy Baton, when you do knock out your opponent's Pokemon with Heavy Baton on it that has 4 retreat costs, they get to move those energies over. However, if you have Beach Court on the field, it doesn't work. Heavy Baton no longer works because your opponent's Pokemon now has 3 retreat cost if it's a basic. And so Beach Court is our counter to cards like Heavy Baton. It's a stadium that just benefits this deck overall because being able to switch into your attacker, your first attacker that you want, is super handy. I did tech around and experiment with Lost Vacuum. Lost Vacuum, of course, is a easy counter to things like Heavy Baton, but I found that Beach Court, in testing for the last year of playing, Beach Court is just the better way to go, and again, it does counter Heavy Baton. Next up, we're going to get to our items and our tools. We'll get to the supporters last. So, onto our items, we have 1 copy of Hisuian Heavy Ball. At one point, again, this was a Nest Ball, but I find that prizing particular cards can be very painful, of course. This also does lighten the load of prize checking, so it is pretty handy to have. So yeah, Hisuian Heavy Ball for all of our one-off Pokemon, which we've run a lot of. We also have 1 copy of Nest Ball, really handy to grab Miraidon turn 1, which is a pretty common thing that happens if you don't end up having Miraidon in your hand or your opening board state. We also use Nest Ball for cards like Mew EX and Squawk as well. Those are other alternatives. 3 copies of Ultra Ball. Ultra Ball is amazing for hand thinning, so if we want to be able to draw more cards with Mew EX, Ultra Ball allows us to do that. It also allows us to grab Pokemon cards like Mew EX, and importantly, cards like Regieleki VMAX as well. 4 copies of Electric Generator. This is where you have to take your bad habits of playing Miraidon as the turbo variant. This deck, you want to thin out as much as you can before you play generators. Using Generator as being able to surprise attack your opponent is very, very strong. So use your electric generators strategically as you can. There's also an argument to save them for late game a little bit because we do have cards in the deck like Super Rod. And Super Rod, if you need to, you can always, bring back, you can do plays with Super Rod where you Super Rod your electric attacker or a Pokemon back into your deck, and you can just tandem unit that Pokemon back onto the board. But if you want your generators to cook extra hard mid to late game, you can easily use Super Rod as well to grab 3 energies, increasing your odds of hitting 2 or 1 on your generators dramatically. So a very strong card in the deck. It helps the generators' consistency. And again, we are playing cards like Squawk and Ultra Ball, so getting cards back that get discarded or Pokemon that get knocked out, Super Rod is fantastic. So keep Super Rod in the deck. Next up, we have Switch Cart. All of our Pokemon in this deck are pretty much basic attackers, and so Switch Cart is handy. You don't really need to use Switch on a Regieleki VMAX because it does have free retreat. If your opponent has Snorlax, it's fine. You can just knock it out with the Regieleki VMAX. However, there's cases where you have to be careful. We only have 2 Switch options in this deck. We got Switch Cart, and our ace spec of choice is Prime Catcher. Other than that, we get our free retreat from Beach Court, we get it from Rescue Board, or the free retreat Pokemon. So, playing against control, you have to be very cautious about when you play these particular cards because they want to mill these cards and get you in that Snorlax block position as quick as possible. Prime Catcher is the ace spec of choice because we want to be able to switch into our attacker that we want and also control the board state and attack exactly what we want to. So using our supporter cards like Arven for Prime Catcher is very, very common. And yeah, so just boss's orders and switch in 1 item card that's searchable. Very, very strong. Onto our tools, we have 5 different tool cards in the deck. We have 1 copy of Rescue Board. Rescue Board, of course, all these tools are searchable with Arven. Arven really does unlock the deck at its fullest level because all these tools really help you play the game and help you in various positions of the game. So you gotta love Arven. So if you're stuck with a non-free retreat Pokemon in the active, Rescue Board is going to be probably the card you grab. Say you need to buff up your HP for your Raikou or your Luxray or just any of your basic Pokemon, Bravery Charm is the grab. A very strong card as well. You have EXP Share here too. EXP Share will usually end up on a Regieleki VMAX, a Raichu, a Mew EX, or Miraidon. Just having EXP Share on the board is very, very handy to maintain those energies' presence in the game state. And then last but not least, a lot of people like to argue with me about this, but we have 2 copies of Forest Seal Stone. We really want that consistency. We really want that strong start. There's a lot of times where you're going to start off your opening turn and go for Arven, and Arven will get you like a generator or a ball card, plus Seal Stone or another really good tool. A lot of the times, you'll grab Seal Stone, depending on the current board state. And yeah, Seal Stone just unlocks your full deck. So whether you needed that extra energy or an energy like a DTE to attack for turn, there's a lot of games where you can prize 1 copy of Forest Seal Stone and you're like, well, I needed the Arven for Forest Seal Stone, now I can't, now I'm kind of screwed. Well, having 2 just allows you to not care if you end up prizing 1, it's no big deal. And then the fact that you have 2 also means you have a better chance at drawing into them as well, so you don't necessarily have to Arven. Your main Forest Seal Pokemon that is going to be rocking the Forest Seal Stone is usually going to be Regieleki V or VMAX. Those are the prime targets for Forest Seal Stone. Ideally, it doesn't want to go on your Raikou ever, but there's cases where it has to if you're getting desperate. Now, our supporters are pretty unorthodox compared to a lot of the other supporters you're used to seeing in Miraidon. Typically, you're going to see a lot of Professor's Research. However, our version of the deck has 0 Professor's Research. So I want you to come in this with an open mind and understand the reason of all these different supporters and how it synchronizes. It just has really great chemistry with the entire deck. So starting off, we have Arven at 3 copies. Arven is amazing. It really does unlock our deck to the fullest extent, similar to how it unlocks a lot of other decks like Charizard. Being able to grab one of our 5 amazing tools, and when any of our amazing items, whether it be a generator, a ball card, super rod, or a prime catcher, Arven is there and is always a pleasure to see unless you play the game. Next up, we have 2 copies of Iono. Iono is very strong. I love the disruption it allows to hit your opponent with. Not only does it disrupt your opponent, but it also gets to reset your hand and let you draw a decent amount of cards, like a pretty good amount of cards. If you combine that Iono draw and Iono disruption with some additional draw of like Miraidon or Raikou V, it really does let you see more cards. So you want to disrupt your opponent at the right time. Do keep in mind, if your opponent does have like a rough start, a dead kind of start, you do not need to be spamming Iono or Judge. You just let them sit there and be sad they have non-playable cards in their hand. So 2 copies of Iono. We used to have 3 at some point, but I found 2 to be the correct amount. Then on to our other draw supporter. Judge is just insanely strong as well. You have to think about the synergy of Luxray V Fang Snipe along with Judge. It is just very crippling for a lot of decks. Being reset to 4 random cards and then they lose 1 is very good. 2 copies of Boss's Orders. In the past, you know, a lot of Miraidon decks would run 3. However, we do have Prime Catcher in our deck, and Prime Catcher is basically Boss's Orders as an item card. And again, we do have so much free retreaters in the deck, so you can always just, if you wanted to only boss your opponent, you can just use Prime Catcher to get into a free retreater, and your Prime Catcher is now a Boss's Orders in that scenario. So 2 copies of Boss. You have to use these strategically as well, especially in the control matchups and just any matchup in general. Next up, we are on to the very tech out supporter cards. So Eri is amazing. Amazing as a control supporter option card. This is the bane of many players' existence. If you hit Charizard with it, you want to hit their rare candies, you want to hit their super rods. If you hit Lost Zone decks with it or Tina decks with it, you want to cook their rods and their Mirage Gates. If you hit Shenpao, you want to hit their rare candies, their superior energy retrievals. And just go ahead and imagine those very demoralizing turns when you use Eri and you also Fang Snipe your opponent and potentially knock a Pokemon out. Bruh. They're losing 3 cards from their hand and a Pokemon. That is hard to bounce back from. So Eri is very strong. Just keep in mind we only have 1 copy, so you do want to time this well. So if you're also able to read your opponent's face and their poker face and whatnot, that is another skill set Eri is pretty good in. Next up, we got Ciphermaniac's Codebreaking. This was a card that used to be, you could say research, it could be Iono. Ciphermaniac's Codebreaking goes without saying, it pairs very well with it. Electric generators, sometimes, I actually got Ruled Strike the other day. So you stack the top 2 cards of your deck with Ciphermaniac. I'm like, I know I'm just gonna play generator next, so of course you grab 2 energies, and I just like to throw them on top of my deck to like let them know like, yo, I'm about to hit 2 on generators. So I just put them on top of my deck and then apply generator. So I grabbed the 2 lighting energies, and when my opponent Rule Shark me, they're like, you still have to look at the other 3 cards. But like, it doesn't matter if I look at the other 3 cards or not, because I have to shuffle my deck anyways. I just found that pretty funny, and someone Rule Sharked me about that. There's also cases where you can use Ciphermaniac's Codebreaking and then use your opponent's Pokestop if they're playing Pokestop in certain matchups, whether it be a Lost Box deck or a Shenpao deck or just other decks that run Pokestop. You can stack your item cards, whether it be Super Rod or Switch Cart or, of course, where is it? Prime Catcher, just somewhere there. Pokestop gets you those into your hand instantly. There's times where you can use Miraidon to draw the 2 cards you're stacking with your with a Cypher. You can also use Raikou to draw what you stacked. There was times where I was running double Raikou V, and so I would use Fleetfoot to draw the first card, retreat into my other Raikou, and then use that next Fleetfoot to draw the second card, and then you're cooking. You know, you're cooking with Ciphermaniac's Codebreaking. Amazing, amazing card. We're gonna get into some of the matchups, and I want to say like the odds of you like winning, I guess, like the ratios going into these decks, so you have an idea of how this deck can perform. Starting off, Miraidon EX versus Charizard. Our matchup now against Charizard is a 50-50. Although I've been beating a lot more Charizards, so I don't want to be cocky and say it's like a 60-40 into Charizard. Charizard's the best deck in format for a reason, so I'm going to confidently say that Miraidon versus Charizard, this version of Miraidon is a 50-50. Charizard is not a deck that scares me. I kind of welcome the Charizards low-key because I like to flex being able to beat Charizards with a deck that typically will lose the Charizard. So 50-50 into Charizard. Second best deck potentially in format, we got Shen Pao. This deck is a 70-30 into Shen Pao because we have cards like Eri to help us out. We have Miraidon to one-shot Shen Pao. We have Iron Hands to one-shot the one prize Pokemon and make 2 prizes happen. EX to copy Moonlight Shuriken. Raikou to cook as well. We have Regieleki VMAX in here as well. Fang Snipe is really good. There's games where I've played and I just Fang Snipe my opponent every single turn and they just don't get to play the game. I get to Fang Snipe their Eri TEF, Fang Snipe the Regielekis. Going against Lost Zone Box and Giratina, I think I always want to go second just because you're able to Fang Snipe once again, or just start using Iron Hands, or take knockouts with Miraidon against Giratina, or Raikou against just other Pokemon in general. Lost Zone Box is a 50-50 matchup. Lost Zone Box is really scary because they have Pokemon like Hoopa EX, Roaring Moon EX, Sableye is really annoying as well sometimes too. So Lost Zone is a 50-50. Going into Giratina V-Star. Giratina V-Star, you are favored with this deck against Giratina. It is a 60-40. We have, again, all of our control elements in this deck. We have all the amazing attackers in here. Mew EXP share to copy Radiant Greninja. We have EXP share on our Raichus to one-shot Giratina V-Stars. We can one-shot Giratina Vs with Miraidon EX. We can one-shot Giratina Vs with Raikou V, Giratina V-Stars with Raikou V Miraidon. God of War can be a little scary at times. I'd say this deck is favored in the God of War 60-40 as well because we have the presence of Iron Hands in here along with Mew EX to copy Moonlight Shuriken. On the Arceus V-Star, let's probably say Arctina. Arctina is the most popular deck. This is a 70-30 into Arctina because we are able to just really dominate the board with big attacks for 280. And disrupt them, and I actually always want to go first against Tina. I want to take away their turn 2 Arceus V-Star Starbirth. So go first against Arc decks is ideal. However, if you do end up going second, because if they win the coin toss, of course, going second isn't bad either, because there's times where you can just use Miraidon EX to Photon Blaster a Arceus, or you can just like cook their draw engine as well with Raikou and like hit into a Bidoof or something like that. Lugia Archeops, heavily favored. I would say Lugia Archeops is a 70-30. There is some danger in that matchup every now and then if your opponent runs really hot and gets like double Archeops and pops off with the Mintinos, Cintinos, and stuff like that. So Lugia Archeops, I put at a 70-30 or an 80-20. Going into Future Box, or more specifically Turbo Future Hands or whatever, I'd say it's a 50-50. Yeah, it's pretty much a coin toss, and then who can start outskilling the opponent first or take those big knockouts. We do have, again, techs in this deck like Beach Court to turn off Heavy Baton, which is the main way Future Box decks are able to recycle or like chain their attacks. 55-45 at best for Miraidon. It's slightly favored, but I want to just confidently say it's a 50-50 for that matchup. Going into Roaring Moon EX, it really just depends on their Roaring Moon deck. Because we do not have Zapdos in this deck, hitting that 230 is pretty hard. We do have the Zeraora to help clean up. However, because we do not have Lost Vacuum in the deck, the Ancient Booster Energy Capsule kind of denies those plays. So Roaring Moon EX at the current time right now, I'd say Roaring Moon is favored about a 65-35, but Roaring Moon EX is not a deck that comes up very often, which is nice to see. Snorlax Stall, this deck is favored or 50-50 in the Snorlax Stall. I'd say 60-40 because I've been consistently beating them recently. But yeah, you just have to pilot it well. If your Squawkabilly hits the board, you pretty much lose. So you have to be able to collapse your Squawk away and try and just make sure Squawk is gone. Typically, you could just Lost Vacuum your Squawk and be fine, but we don't play Lost Vacuum anymore. Pidgeot Control is a beautiful deck to play against as well. We did end up beating it at top 4 at a recent cup. And yeah, just Pidgeot, we're able to cripple their Pidgeot engine all the time, take multiple prizes. Dialga is a little scary. You probably want to take first from them, and Dialga is a 50-50. It's very scary. We really need to play off of our Zeraora being in the deck as a single prize, because them just being able to take 2 prizes back-to-back turns, like if they start Chronos, is huge. I did beat the last 4 Dialgas I played against, but I do respect the matchup as a 50-50. And then Miraidon EX, that's just a 50-50 honestly too. Golden Go EX used to be scary for this deck, but now it's slightly favored. If you enjoyed this video or you found it useful in any way, I would really love if you hit that like button down below. Maybe subscribe, check out a tournament vlog or 2 on the channel. And if you want to follow my journey at the North American International Championships, make sure you follow me on social media. With that said, I'll catch you guys next time. Peace!